Welcome to Fine Art Diary. Today we are going to paint this beautiful landscape with this tranquil pond with some ducks in it. At the same time we will see how to paint it step by step. So let's get started. So this is the color palette I am going to use today, and in this I am using titanium white, lemon yellow, cad yellow medium, cad yellow deep, yellow ochre, crimson lake, deep magenta. Two blues I am using ultramarine blue and cobalt blue, viridian green, and one natural color I am using over here, that is raw umber and Payne's grey. Let's jump into the painting. At first I am taking titanium white, ultramarine blue, and a touch of cobalt blue, and it has to be a very light mixture. Let's paint the sky. I have planned for a very simplified sky because the rest of my painting will have so much of detailing, and that is the reason the sky should be very much simplified. Over here I am mixing crimson lake to it to make the mixture violet. You can see in the canvas barely that transition is visible, but when physically you are looking at the sky, you can see all these color transition. Once again, let's take titanium white, yellow ochre, cobalt blue, and crimson to it. Let's take a little more titanium white, and I have mixed a kind of grey color, and let's create the background. So this is a background land I'm painting right now. Because this is made of soil, it should have yellow ochre and crimson to it, but because it is at a distance, I have to mix a little bit blue and titanium white to it. So that's going on inside my mind, and according to that I'm mixing my colors. This background layer should not be very dark, otherwise it will lose the sense of the distance in this landscape. So we should be very careful about the value of this particular layer. Now I'm mixing raw umber to it to make it little more darker. Now let's give the suggestion of the connecting areas. And you can see with these dark lines you can create the suggestion of it. Now let's take raw umber, Payne's grey, mix yellow ochre to it. I'm also mixing ultramarine blue and titanium white. Let's add more blue to it to make it more cooler, and let's try. I feel it's a little bit too dark, so adding a little more titanium white to it to make it lighter. The reason I explained before some time. And now the value is looking fine to me. So now this is the time to block in the background trees. And you can see with broad brush strokes I am just giving suggestion. I am not creating any individual tree. Over it later on you can give the suggestion of some trees, but right now I am just blocking the mass of it. Alright, now let's mix Payne's grey with the same mixture and making the mixture a little bit darker, because this plane a little bit in front of that background plane. So it has to be a little more darker to increase the contrast a little bit, and that is the reason I have made it a little more darker. Alright, now we'll paint the water surface, and for that I am taking titanium white, raw umber, viridian green, yellow ochre, and the blues. Also taking my yellows, little more raw umber to make the color little bit desaturated, and now mixing cadmium yellow. Basically I wanted a grayish green color for the water surface, and that's how I got it. And let's paint. The sky is blue, but the water body I am painting with my green, because at the background later on I am going to paint some trees and the reflection will be there on the water surface. So this is actually the reflection I am painting right now. Now this is the time to give some suggestions of the background trees, and with the same mixture I am mixing a little bit blue to make it a little bit cooler. Then only the background layer will create the distance. I'm just creating some tree patterns over there. Let's add cad yellow medium to it to give it a little variation. Let's add more blue to it. Also mixing titanium white, adding more blue to it, and raw umber, and you can see I have got grayish greenish kind of mixture, and in the canvas also you can see I am getting different variations of the colors. Somewhere it is a little bit more blue, somewhere it is a little bit more green, but both blues and greens are very desaturated. Let's add crimson to it to make more variations. Alright, now I'm mixing cadmium yellow to it to make it a little bit saturated green. And let's paint. Alright, now with the same mixture, I'm adding a little titanium white to it to make it a little more lighter, so that for the background trees we can create less contrast. Right now I'm dealing with the background. So while painting the landscape, we have to remember one thing. Most of the cases we are going to convert the entire landscape into 3 different parts: the background, the midground, and the foreground. In the background we should keep less contrast, in the midground a little more, and in the foreground we are going to keep maximum contrast. So almost in the same layer I have created the dark tone as well as the mid tone. Now let's take ultramarine blue and let's give some suggestion for the stems and branches. Let's exaggerate some dark shapes over there. I am also giving some suggestions of different kinds of trees. So after that big tree, maybe there is a palm tree over there in that area. Also adding the mid-tones at the same time Because I am going to leave these areas like this only without any detailing, the background elements we should make very spontaneously. Over here also a cluster of trees, and with a few brush strokes we have to make it. I have added Crimson Lake to the same mixture. Also taking the mid-tone, you can see I am doing only the blocking over here. Alright, switching to a regal brush and taking titanium white, crimson lake and a touch of yellow ochre. And let's give some suggestion of the stems and some branches. When I was standing in front of this pond, I saw so much of detailing in this particular area. But while painting as an artist, you should eliminate and you should decide which part to keep and which part to discard. We should not paint everything what we see in front of our eyes. And that's what I am trying to do right now. With a few brush strokes, I am trying to get that detailing in that background. That's fine. Now let's take cadmium yellow, viridian green, cobalt blue and titanium white, and let's paint the mid-tone or the mid-ground. Here I am using a filbert brush to create the pattern of the leaves. In this particular landscape, I will try to keep all the patterns of all the trees different, because this is going to be a green dominated landscape and I will have less scope of harmonizing the landscape in color, but I can harmonize the painting by using different textures and tree patterns. Over here, one thing to notice, in the mid-ground, my detailing level is a little bit more than the background, because this particular section is coming towards the foreground. Alright, now let's mix titanium white, crimson lake, yellow ochre, ultramarine blue, and let's paint the highlight of the ground plane. You have noticed I have made the same mixture I created in the beginning, only a little bit more yellow ochre and titanium white in this particular mixture to convert it into a highlight mixture. That's alright. Now let's convert it into a darker mixture by adding the previous mixture to it, so that we can paint the receding plane. Over here you can see I have converted the land into two planes, the top plane and the side planes. Intentionally, I am not giving any smaller detailing at the background, and this is my personal choice, because how it will come forward towards the mid-ground and the foreground there should be more detailing, but at the background there should be very less detailing, and that is the reason I am leaving the background in the blocking stage only. Over here you can see I am giving the suggestion of the grasses around the pond. Now let's create a darker mixture by using raw umber, crimson lake, yellow ochre and ultramarine blue. And let's give the suggestion of the connecting areas of the stones of the land and the water surface. Now let's make the reflection a little more prominent. So for that I'm taking cad yellow medium, viridian green, yellow ochre and titanium white, and created a lighter mixture than the previous one. And let's paint the reflection. Same thing I have to do for this side also. That's fine. Now let's make the reflection more prominent by making the water surface little more darker, and for that I have made a darker mixture by using paints grey, raw umber, ultramarine blue, yellow ochre and cad yellow medium. Now let's paint the water surface. Now this is the time to paint the foreground, and for that I am taking paints grey, raw umber, yellow ochre, viridian green, and let's do the block-in of the entire foreground mass. So at the very beginning I am doing the block-in of the shadow part of it. This is the block-in stage and we have to work very spontaneously in this stage. Over here I am looking at everything as a single shape. Now let's do the block-in of a foreground tree, and I am using the same colors as my mixture. Now let's start painting. For this I am using a number 2 flat brush. As in my previous videos I described how it can be used to create the leafy textures. That's fine. Now switching to a fan brush. Here I am using different brushes to create different textures for different trees. These are the shadow shapes I am creating right now. Over it I have to paint the mid-tone, and after that I am going to paint the highlights. You can see very spontaneously I am painting, and at the same time I am trying to give it a volume. That's alright. Now let's do the block-in of the foreground stones, and for that I am taking yellow ochre, crimson lake and titanium white. Now let's do the block-in. We have to be very loose in the beginning. You can see I am trying to establish the things with bigger brush strokes. Let's make the mixture a little more darker, and for that I am using ultramarine blue, crimson lake and yellow ochre. Here is one suggestion: while doing the block-in we have to do it very quickly. Then we are not going to think too much about the detailing. By practicing this way, most of the places the block-in will be correct. In that particular area, some rocky steps are there. So you can see I am using two different values, one lighter, one mid-tone, So I'm using the lighter value for the top plane. I'm using the darker value for the side plane. Now let's mix raw umber, crimson and blues, and this mixture I'm going to use for my shadows. You can see very roughly I am establishing the shadow pattern. In this stage we should try to figure out only the shadow shapes from the scene. Then very quickly with some brush strokes we'll be able to do the blocking of it. Now let's prepare a mixture for the mid-tone, and for that I am using titanium white, crimson lake, ultramarine blue and yellow ochre. And you can see I have created a kind of warm violet color. At the very beginning I have made it cooler because first of all I will try to establish the shadow shapes and later on I will introduce the warm light. Over here you can see I'm trying to find out the top planes, and like this if we can lay down all the planes in its correct position, then there will be a possibility of a successful blocking. Alright, my foreground blocking is almost ready. Now let's mix the mid-tone for the trees. For now, I will keep this mixture. Before doing anything, I want to draw the stems of the trees first. And for this, I am using a liner brush. For this mixture, titanium white, yellow ochre and cad yellow dip can be used. All these branches will not be visible later on because we are going to paint over it. Some of it will be visible through the leaves. Alright, now let's take the green and let's paint the mid-tone of the leaves pattern. For this particular tree, I am using the same pattern I have used for my darks. So there are some hanging branches you can see. It will give the suggestion of some vines over there. One thing to remember that I should not cover the entire shadow shape. So from here and there the shadow shape should be visible and then only it will look volumetric. The same thing I am going to do at the bottom also. You can see there are two volumes and they are connected with those vine branches. When I was standing in front of this pond, two things attracted me very much. One was the still water and the second thing was this particular tree. I just liked the bright leaves, how it was standing out against that shadow pattern. Alright, now it's time to paint the mid-tone for the tree standing behind. And for this I am using a filbert brush. I have added a little more cadmium yellow to it. Let's start painting. As I told you previously, I'll try to create all the trees different. So in this case also I'm trying to create the leaves patterns different. And for that I'm using a filbert brush. So now you can see the tree in front and the tree at the back are totally different. So like this, by creating different textures, you can create different trees. Now let's give the suggestion of the highlights. And for that, I am mixing lemon yellow to the same mixture. Not everywhere, but here and there. And with this we'll establish our light which is coming from the right hand side. That's alright. Now let's take titanium white, crimson lake, cad yellow deep, a little more titanium white, cad yellow medium, and let's put the highlight of the branches. And definitely it also should be here and there because most of the part of it will be in shadow. That's fine. Now let's create some highlights for the rocks also. These steps are human made and that is the reason it is kept very evenly. But while painting we need to figure out how each slab is different from other because each of the rocks will have its own shape. Each rock is a different character. Alright, now it's time to create the highlight for the second tree. And for that I'm mixing the same mixture with a little bit lemon yellow. While doing it, I'm keeping it in my mind that the light is coming from the right hand side. And in this case I need to take care not to cover the previously painted mid-tone entirely. This is a highlight, so a pinch of it here and there, though I am going to paint another layer at the top of this layer later on. Over here I am giving the suggestion of the vines with some brush strokes. At the same time, let's give the highlights for the stems also. That's alright, now we are going to add the darkest dark in the rocks, and for that I'm mixing paints grey, crimson lake and ultramarine blue. Let's re-establish some of the darks. Now this is the time I am trying to see the individual rocks, and at the same time I am trying to figure out all the cast shadow pattern. You also can see I have divided the bigger shapes into smaller shapes. That's alright, now let's mix a mid-tone. And for that I am using titanium white, crimson lake, ultramarine blue and cad yellow deep. I have to exaggerate the top planes now. But before that, I am thinking of painting the water surface. So taking titanium white, ultramarine blue, and a touch of yellow ochre. And let's paint the water surface. This is a pond we are painting. The water surface is going to be reflective, and how prominent the reflection is will depend according to the size of the ripples. If in the scene the breeze is there, then we can show very small ripples on the water surface. But if in the scene there is no wind, then the water surface can be very still. So it will depend on what we want to depict in the scene. For this particular landscape, I wanted to keep the suggestion of the breeze in the scene. And definitely, as I discussed, this is the only way we can suggest that by creating some ripples on the water surface. So later on, when our viewer is looking at this painting, he or she can experience what you are thinking right now. While painting this landscape, I'm trying to feel that warm sunlight and the cool breeze beside this pond. What I was actually experiencing when I was actually standing over there. Here is one suggestion. While painting with acrylic, whatever the correct value we are thinking to put, we should make it a little lighter than that, because after drying for acrylic paint there will be a tendency to darken the shape a little bit. That's alright, now let's concentrate on this rocky slope. So as we have seen previously, I created the light top planes for those smaller stones. Right now I am giving the information of the cast shadows of that area. Now let's paint the lighter planes. So the light is coming from the right hand side, so all the right hand side planes will be very much brighter than the front planes. Over here, some of the areas, the top planes are also getting direct sunlight, so definitely it will appear brighter. Now you can see I am reconstructing each of the rocky slabs, and this is the time to work with the individual objects. You can see over here I am dividing the rocks into more smaller pieces, and right now I am dealing only with the top planes. I am also giving the suggestion some of the areas the light is flooded from one plane to another, gradually coming downward, and right now I am trying to feel the areas that direct sunlight is hitting. In acrylic painting, this is the way you can do the shading by shifting the values. This particular area, I am assuming right hand side some trees are there, and through the leaves barely the sunlight is coming, so mostly this is illuminated by the reflected light, and that is the reason you can compare this stone is much more cooler than the previously painted highlights. That's looking fine to me. Now let's re-establish some of the darkest dark for the smaller rocks in this area. Alright, now let's add the cool bounce light. And over here you can see these stones are not getting direct sunlight but cool reflected light. In this, the scene is going to look harmonious. So the rocks are not getting the direct sunlight I am painting with this cool bounce light. Gradually you can notice the brush strokes are becoming slower because I am concentrating on the individual objects right now. And also you can see I am dividing the bigger shapes into more smaller shapes, and that's how we get the detailing in a particular area. Now I am putting some reds here and there because the rocks should have its local color also. So some rocks are appearing very much saturated in red to me, and I am just trying to give the suggestion of it. Alright, now let's create some highlights for the rocks which are in shadows. Why some of these areas will be exaggerated? Because some of these rocks are still wet and it can scatter more reflected light. That's alright, but you can see above these rocks the green tree is there, so the rocks should have the green bounce also, and that is what I am trying to do right now. That's alright. Now let's paint the reflection of the tree on the water surface. And the texture I created for the tree, I am creating the same texture in the reflection also. Let's modify the shape of the sky reflection also in this area. I am actually creating the room for painting the tree reflection. Coming back, and let's paint the tree pattern. Now moving towards the lighter side of it. So you can see I have made my mixture towards the mid-tone. I have blended this area properly. Now the first slab of the step is under the water, so I am glazing that particular step with the same color. You can see now it is inside the water surface. Also creating the dark reflection of those smaller rocks. Now the cloud will be seen through that reflection, and I am trying to give the suggestion of that. Not too much, but here and there a little bit. Alright, now it's time to work for the left hand side of the foreground, and let's do the block in of a big tree over here. I am using the same mixture of paints grey, raw umber, ultramarine blue, crimson lake, and a touch of yellow ochre, just to keep the color a little bit chromatic. Though in the canvas it is barely visible, but it is a chromatic dark grey color. So basically I am using three primary colors: the red, the blue, the yellow, which is leading to a dark grey mixture. Switching to a rigger brush, and let's paint some narrow branches. The beauty of rigger brush is it can hold lots of paint, but it can produce very thin lines. That's fine. Now let's start with the shadow pattern of the tree, and you can see I have started with a flat brush just to cover the entire area very quickly. For this I'm using the same mixture but just have added a little bit viridian to it. Switching back to my smaller brush just to create smaller branches behind. For this particular tree, I am making the patterns a little bit bigger than the mid-ground trees, because definitely it is in front of the camera and the leaves will appear much more bigger than those mid-ground trees. We are dealing with the design and I am thinking of the composition of it. Now let's draw some smaller branches. Let's add some more leafy pattern in this area. And similarly, like the mid-ground, I am giving the suggestion of some vines over here. Switching back to my liner brush, giving some more suggestions. That's fine. Now it's time to paint the mid-tones of the tree. For this particular tree also I will try to make the pattern different, and you can see for this particular tree I have taken a round brush. I am trying to paint the leaves a little bit bigger in shape. For the leaves I have mixed cobalt blue, viridian green and cad yellow medium. You can see the leaves are appearing cooler in tone right now because most of the leaves are in shadow in the mid-tone. I should not cover all the shadow shapes. If I do that, it will lose the volume and will be converted into a two-dimensional object. Now let's add the volume to the stems also. And right now I am adding the local color of the stem. It should not be very bright because for the entire tree only some of the areas it is getting the direct sunlight, otherwise most of the tree is in shadow. Now this is the time to add the highlights. For the highlights, we have to be very careful because some of the areas are only getting the direct sunlight. Now you can see we have created a totally different kind of texture for this tree, as we discussed previously. Now all the trees of this landscape are looking different from each other. There is no hard and fast rule to do that, but it can create harmony in the scene. Now adding brightest light for the leaves, a touch of it here and there. Now it's time to add some brighter branches. That's alright, now it's time to paint some smaller plants at the base. Here also in the same way I am going to place the patterns. So this area also it is in shadow. At the right hand side also I will block in some small plants. Now I am doing all these things according to the need of this composition. Everywhere the process is the same. First we need to create the shadow shape, then the midtone, then the highlight. Here in this area, some leaves are getting direct sunlight, and that's how those leaves are so bright in color. Alright, now let's give some suggestion of the grasses. And you can see with a fan brush, you can quickly do the blocking of some grasses. Now let's add some final touches. I have taken the brightest green by mixing the lemon yellow to the mixture and giving the suggestion of the direct sunlight hitting some of the leaves. In between the rocks also we can give the suggestion of some small plants. Some more highlights in this area. I'm just giving the direction of the sunlight. Alright, now let's make this landscape living by adding some ducks in it. Now let's add the reflection of it on the water surface. That's okay. Now I am planning to add 2 more ducks in this area. These 2 will be too tiny in shape. Then also I will try to paint it in a particular action. We are at the end point of this painting. That's fine, and here is the final painting. Hope you enjoyed today's session. You also can explore the other landscape painting tutorials in my channel. I also have given some links in the description, you can check it out. You may subscribe the channel because many more painting videos are coming in future. Thank you very much for watching.